The great chamber of the Galactic Senate stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystal and living stone. Light from the twin suns of Nexus Prime filtered through the dome above, casting rainbow patterns across the assembled representatives of 347 spacefaring species. High Arbiter Velthax stood at the central podium, his 6 eyes scanning the vast amphitheater. His people, the Velkari, had served as administrators of the Senate for 12,000 years. In all that time, he had never seen the chamber so united in purpose. "The evidence has been presented," he announced, his voice amplified by acoustic crystals embedded in the walls. "The species known as humans have expanded into 14 systems designated as Galactic Preserved Territories. They have harvested resources without permits. They have established colonies on worlds marked for future Senate development. The question before us today is simple. How do we respond?" Ambassador Crixon of the Mallory Consortium rose from his seat in the 3rd tier. His insectoid body clicked and rattled as he moved, a sign of agitation among his kind. How is this even a question? The humans have violated dozens of territorial agreements. They take what they want without asking. They spread like a disease across the fringe. "Perhaps because no one has explained the rules to them," suggested a soft voice from the opposite side of the chamber. Ambassador Yela of the Thorn Collective was known for her careful approach to diplomacy. Her species, the Yeel, resembled tall flowers more than animals, their petal-like appendages swaying gently as she spoke. "Have we attempted to contact them? To establish communication?" Crixon made a dismissive sound. "Why should we? They know nothing of our ways. They are primitive, aggressive, and dangerous. The reports speak for themselves." He gestured toward the holographic display floating above the central podium. Images appeared showing human vessels moving through space, ships that bristled with weapons, stations surrounded by defensive platforms, soldiers in armored suits conducting training exercises. "They prepare for war," Crixon continued. "Look at them. Every ship carries enough firepower to level a small moon. Every colony has defensive installations. They expect conflict. They welcome it." Senator Tormac of the Archives Division raised one of his 4 hands. "I must note for the record that humans have never actually attacked anyone. The weapons may be defensive in nature." "Defensive against what?" Crixon demanded. "They believe they are alone in the universe. Who are they defending against?" "No, Senator. These are not defensive preparations. These are the actions of a species that intends to conquer." The chamber erupted in noise. Hundreds of species began talking at once, their various forms of communication creating a wall of sound that made the crystal walls vibrate. High Arbiter Velthax struck the ceremonial chime 3 times before order was restored. "We will have a proper debate," he said firmly. "Senator Mortal of the Military Assessment Committee will present the strategic analysis." Senator Mortal was a Kreth, a species that had evolved for combat. She stood nearly 3 meters tall, her scaled body covered in natural armor. When she spoke, even the most aggressive ambassadors fell silent. "My committee has studied human military development for the past 50 cycles," she began. "What we have found is concerning. 50 cycles ago, humans had barely left their home planet. Today, they occupy 47 systems. Their population has grown from 8 billion to nearly 30 billion. Their technology advances at a rate we have never observed in any species." She manipulated the holographic display, showing graphs and charts that climbed steadily upward. "At their current rate of expansion, humans will enter core Senate territory within 30 years. Within 50 years, they will control more systems than any 3-member species combined. Within 100 years," she paused, letting the numbers speak for themselves. "Within 100 years, they will be the dominant force in the galaxy. and we will have lost any ability to contain them. The chamber fell into shocked silence. Ambassador Yila's petals had turned pale, a sign of deep distress among her kind. Even Crixon seemed taken aback by the projections. "What do you recommend?" High Arbiter Velthax asked quietly. Senator Morales' expression was grim. "We have a window of opportunity. It will not remain open long. If we act now, with our combined forces, we can neutralize the human threat before it grows beyond our control. If we wait, we may not have the chance again." "You are proposing war," Ambassador Yila said, "against a species that has done nothing to us directly." "I am proposing survival," Mortal replied. "The mathematics do not lie. Either we act now, or we accept human dominance as inevitable." The debate continued for 6 standard hours. Representatives argued back and forth, some calling for caution, others demanding immediate action. Ancient rivalries were briefly set aside as species that had not agreed on anything in centuries found common ground in their fear of this unknown threat. In the end, High Arbiter Velthax called for the vote. All those in favor of unified military action against the human homeworld. Designation Earth. Signal now. The voting crystals around the chamber began to glow. One by one, then in clusters, then in waves, they turned red for approval. When the count was complete, 312 species had voted yes. 35 had voted no. "The motion carries," Velthax announced. "By order of the Galactic Senate, we hereby declare war on humanity." The chamber erupted in a mix of cheering and anxious murmuring. History had been made. For the first time in 3,000 years, the full might of the Galactic Senate would be directed against a single enemy. Ambassador Yila remained seated as others celebrated around her. Something felt wrong. She could not explain it, but a deep unease had settled into her core. War was a serious matter. The Senate did not make such decisions lightly, and yet this decision had been made in a single day, based on projections and possibilities rather than actual aggression. She noticed a junior clerk from the Archives Division pushing through the crowd toward the High Arbiter's podium. The young female was trembling so badly that her carapace was audibly rattling. Her face showed an expression that Yila recognized from 100 diplomatic crises. The expression of someone who had just discovered a terrible mistake. Yila rose from her seat and began moving toward the podium, her petals folding tight against her body in anticipation of bad news. Whatever that clerk had found, it was going to change everything. The celebration in the chamber continued, oblivious to the small drama unfolding at the center of power. 312 species congratulated themselves on their decisive action. None of them knew that their decision was about to become the most embarrassing moment in 12,000 years of Galactic Senate history. The emergency session was called before the celebration had even ended. High Arbiter Velthax had cleared the main chamber and summoned only the most senior officials. The mood in the room had shifted from triumph to confusion to something approaching panic. Senator Tormac of the Archives Division stood at the central podium, his 4 hands clutching a data tablet so tightly that the screen was cracking. He had spent the past several hours digging through records that had not been accessed in centuries. What he found had made him physically ill. "It began 203 Earth years ago," he said, his voice hoarse from stress. A survey vessel called the Wandering Eye was conducting routine exploration of the outer spiral arm. They discovered a planet in a small yellow star system. The planet was unusual. It had liquid water, a breathable atmosphere, and abundant life. He pulled up the ancient survey report on the holographic display. Images appeared showing a blue and green world covered in clouds. The survey team observed the inhabitants from orbit. They were primitive by our standards. They had basic agriculture, simple machines, and had recently developed the ability to fly within their own atmosphere. The team leader made a note in the official record. Tormac read directly from the report. Species show significant potential. Recommend flagging for future contact. Estimated time until spaceflight capability, 100 to 200 local years. Suggest follow-up mission at that time. This is standard procedure, said Senator Mortal impatiently. We have thousands of species flagged for future contact. Yes, Tormac agreed. And for each one, we have a protocol. When a species develops spaceflight, we send a delegation. We introduce them to the Senate. We invite them to sign the charter. It is how things have been done for millennia. He paused, swallowing hard. The follow-up mission for Earth was scheduled. The invitation was drafted. Everything was prepared according to protocol. And then what? High Arbiter Velfax demanded. A filing error, Tormac whispered. The mission orders were placed in the wrong administrative queue. They sat there for 200 years. No one noticed. No one checked. The humans developed spaceflight, left their planet, colonized other worlds, built an interstellar civilization, all while waiting for an invitation that was sitting in a forgotten folder in our archives. The room fell into stunned silence. Ambassador Crixon was the first to speak. That cannot be correct. Someone must have noticed. There are systems in place to prevent exactly this kind of oversight. The systems failed, Tormac said simply. Or rather, they worked exactly as designed. The survey team flagged Earth as low priority because humans were so primitive. Low priority missions are reviewed only once every 50 cycles. By the time anyone might have caught the error, it had already been buried under thousands of other files. So the humans were never contacted, High Arbiter Velfax said slowly, as if testing the words. They were never invited to join the Senate. They never signed the charter. Correct. They do not know we exist. As far as we can determine, they believe they are alone in the universe. Velfax closed all 6 of his eyes in an expression of deep pain. And we just declared war on them. Yes, the implications hung in the air like poison gas. Senator Mortal was the first to grasp the full scope of the disaster. The Charter, she said. Section 1, Article 3. The Senate may only take military action against member species who have violated the terms of their membership, or against non-member species who have committed acts of aggression against Senate members. The humans have done neither, Ambassador Yila said softly. They cannot have violated membership terms because they were never offered membership. They cannot have committed aggression against us because they do not know we exist. Which means our declaration of war is illegal, Crixon said, his voice rising in pitch. Which means we have violated our own charter. Which means the entire Senate could be dissolved, Velfax finished. Every government that voted yes could face legal challenges from their own citizens. Treaties that have held for thousands of years could be nullified. The political chaos would be unprecedented. The room erupted in panicked conversation. Representatives who had celebrated their victory just hours ago were now contemplating the destruction of their careers, their governments, and possibly their entire way of life. Tormac raised his hands for silence. There is more? More? Velfax looked as though he could not bear any additional bad news. While the humans were waiting for contact that never came, they did not remain idle. Tormac pulled up a new display showing maps of human expansion. They developed faster than light travel independently. They figured it out on their own, without any guidance from us. Their technology is different from ours, but it works. In some ways, it may even be more efficient. The maps showed human territory spreading across the spiral arm like spilled water. Colony after colony, system after system, growing and multiplying without any knowledge of the greater galactic community. They built all of this thinking they were alone, Tormak continued. Every ship, every station, every weapon. They expected to find enemies among the stars and prepared accordingly. Their entire civilization is designed for conflict because they assumed conflict was inevitable. And now we have just proven them right. Yila said quietly. Senator Mortal studied the maps with a professional eye. Their defensive network is more extensive than our initial assessment suggested. If they believe themselves to be under attack, they will fight. And they will fight with everything they have. Then we must move quickly, Lulthak said, before any word of our declaration reaches them. We must send a diplomatic mission immediately. We explain the situation, offer our apologies, and invite them to join the Senate properly. Once they sign the charter, the declaration can be officially annulled. And if they refuse to sign? Crixon asked. The question hung in the air, unanswered. Because everyone in the room knew that if the humans refused, there would be no good options left. Only bad ones and worse ones. The diplomatic vessel Harmony's Voice was the finest ship in the Senate's fleet. It had been designed specifically for first contact situations, equipped with translation systems, cultural databases, and defensive screens that could withstand almost any attack. For 3,000 years, it had carried ambassadors to new species across the galaxy. Ambassador Yila had requested the mission personally. The Yil were known throughout the Senate as skilled negotiators. They had a gift for finding common ground between species that seemed to have nothing in common. If anyone could smooth over this disaster, it would be her. The journey to human space took 6 days in hyperspace. Yila spent the time studying everything the Senate had collected about humanity. The original survey reports, the scattered observations from automated probes, the intercepted communications that human ships broadcast without any apparent concern for who might be listening. The more she learned, the more concerned she became. Humans were strange. They lived short lives, rarely more than a century, but they accomplished more in those brief spans than many species did in 10 times as long. They fought constantly among themselves, dividing into nations and factions that competed for resources and influence. And yet, when faced with external threats, they united with remarkable speed. They were emotional creatures. They made decisions based on feelings as much as logic. They held grudges for generations, but could also forgive terrible wrongs if they believed the apology was sincere. They valued something they called honor, a concept that seemed to mean keeping promises, even when it was not in their interest to do so. Most concerning of all, they were creative. Their technology had advanced so quickly because they were constantly trying new approaches, discarding ideas that did not work and building on ones that did. They made mistakes, but they learned from them. And they never ever gave up. The Harmony's Voice dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, as far from the human homeworld as possible, while still being technically inside their claimed territory. Yila had ordered all weapons powered down and all shields set to minimum. She wanted to appear as non-threatening as possible. It did not seem to matter. Within minutes of their arrival, sensors detected multiple contacts converging on their position. Human ships, moving faster than should have been possible, appeared from behind asteroids and moons where they had been hiding. Within an hour, the Harmony's Voice was completely surrounded. Yila counted 17 warships. Each one was smaller than her diplomatic vessel, but they bristled with weapons in a way that made her petals curl in instinctive fear. These were not exploration ships or trading vessels. These were machines built for one purpose only. A communication channel opened. A human face appeared on the view screen. Male, Yila determined from her studies. Older, with lines around his eyes and gray hair cut very short. He wore a uniform covered in symbols that probably indicated rank and experience. Unknown vessel, the human said. His voice was calm, but carried an edge of steel beneath the surface. This is Admiral Chun of the United Earth Defense Force. You have entered human space without authorization. You will identify yourself and state your intentions. Failure to comply will be considered a hostile act. Yila took a moment to compose herself. First impressions were critical in any negotiation. Greetings, Admiral Chun. I am Ambassador Yila of the Galactic Senate. I come in peace, representing 347 spacefaring species. We wish to establish formal diplomatic relations with humanity. There was a long pause. Admiral Chun's expression did not change, but something shifted in his eyes. Did you say 347 spacefaring species? Yes. The galaxy is home to many forms of intelligent life. We have been aware of humanity for some time and deeply regret that formal contact was not established earlier. There were administrative difficulties that I would be happy to explain in detail. Another pause. Then Admiral Chun turned away from the screen and spoke to someone off camera. Yila could not hear what was said, but the conversation went on for several minutes. When the Admiral turned back, his expression had hardened. Ambassador, I have been given authority to escort you to Geneva Station for a formal meeting with representatives of the United Earth Government. You will follow the designated flight path exactly. Any deviation will be treated as hostile action. Is that understood? Perfectly understood, Admiral. We are grateful for the opportunity to speak with your leaders. Save your gratitude, Chun said. You may not feel so thankful once you see what is waiting for you. The channel closed. The human ships formed a tight escort around the Harmony's voice. And together, they began the journey into the heart of human space. Yila watched through the viewports as they passed through system after system. Human colonies hung in orbit around planets and moons. Mining stations extracted resources from asteroids. Massive shipyards built vessels that made even the largest Senate cruisers look small. And everywhere, there were weapons. Defensive platforms bristling with missile launchers. Patrol ships sweeping through traffic lanes. Ground installations that could probably shoot down anything in orbit. These were not the primitive beings the original survey had discovered. These were people who had looked at the empty universe and decided they would be ready for whatever it contained. They had built an empire in the darkness, never knowing that the light of other civilizations was just beyond their reach. Now that light had finally arrived, and it had come bearing the worst possible news. Geneva Station hung in orbit above the human homeworld, a massive structure of metal and glass that served as the center of human government. Ambassador Yila was escorted through endless corridors by armed guards who said nothing and never stopped watching her. The conference room they brought her to was small and plain. No decorations, no ceremonial objects, just a metal table, uncomfortable chairs, and a wall of windows showing the blue and white planet below. Yila realized with a start that she was looking at Earth itself, the origin point of this strange and troubling species. 5 humans waited for her. Admiral Chun was there, standing against the wall with his arms crossed. The others sat at the table, their faces revealing nothing of their thoughts. A woman at the center of the group spoke first. Ambassador Yila, I am Secretary General Okonkwo. These are Defense Minister Park, Science Advisor Chun, Foreign Minister Hassan, and you have already met Admiral Chun. We represent the United Earth Government. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Yila said. I understand that our arrival must have come as a shock. That is one word for it, Secretary General Okonkwo replied. Please, sit. Tell us why you are here. Yila settled into a chair that was clearly not designed for her body shape. She had rehearsed this conversation 100 times during the journey, but now that the moment had arrived, she found herself struggling for words. I must begin with an apology, she said. 200 years ago, a survey vessel discovered your planet. Earth was flagged for future contact. An invitation to join the Galactic Senate was prepared. But through a series of administrative errors, that invitation was never delivered. You were forgotten. The humans showed no reaction. They simply waited. For 2 centuries, humanity has believed itself alone in the universe. That was our failure. We should have contacted you. We should have welcomed you into the galactic community. Instead, we allowed a simple filing mistake to leave you isolated and uninformed. Still no reaction. Yila pressed on. Recently, the Senate became aware of human expansion into territories designated as galactic preserves. Without understanding that humans had no knowledge of our laws or our existence, the Senate voted to take action. A declaration of war was passed. Now there was a reaction. It was subtle, just a slight tension in the shoulders, a hardening of the eyes. But Yila could see it in all 5 humans. You declared war on us, Secretary General Okonkwo said slowly, without ever speaking to us, without any attempt at negotiation or explanation. Yes, it was a terrible mistake. As soon as the error was discovered, I was sent to establish proper contact and to offer a path toward peace. The Senate wishes to formally invite humanity to join as a member species. Once you sign the charter, the declaration of war will be annulled. All territorial disputes can be resolved through proper diplomatic channels. Defense Minister Park leaned forward. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. Your Senate forgot about us for 200 years. Then they looked at our expansion and got scared. So they voted to attack us without bothering to check whether we even knew they existed. And now you are here because someone realized that attacking a species you never invited breaks your own rules. That is an accurate summary, Yila admitted. So this is not about making peace with humanity, Park continued. This is about saving your own political system from collapsing due to an illegal vote. Yila's petals flushed with embarrassment. The motivations of the Senate are complex, but the outcome can still be beneficial for all parties. Membership in the Senate provides many advantages. Access to technology, trade agreements, mutual defense pacts. Humanity would benefit greatly from joining. Would we? Secretary General Okonkwo asked. Tell me, Ambassador, this Senate that forgot we existed, this Senate that voted for war without investigation, what exactly would we be joining? The question cut deeper than Yila expected. She had always believed in the Senate, in its mission of uniting the galaxy under a framework of law and cooperation. But sitting here, facing these humans who had built their civilization entirely alone, she found it difficult to explain why they should trust an organization that had already failed them so completely. The Senate is not perfect, she said finally. No institution that spans hundreds of species and thousands of worlds can be perfect. But it has maintained peace in the galaxy for 12,000 years. It has prevented wars that would have killed billions. It has enabled cooperation and progress that would have been impossible otherwise. And yet you voted for war against us, Admiral Chun said from his position against the wall. 312 species decided to attack a planet that had never threatened them. Out of fear, Yila said. Your expansion was unprecedented. Your technology, developed entirely independently, was advancing at a rate that frightened many in the Senate. They saw you as a threat. We were surviving, Secretary General Okonkwo said quietly. We thought we were alone in a hostile universe. We built and expanded because that is what humans do. We did not know there was anyone to threaten. A long silence fell over the room. Yila could feel the weight of 200 years of isolation pressing down on the conversation. These people had grown up believing they were the only intelligent life in existence. Now they were being told that hundreds of advanced civilizations had known about them and simply could not be bothered to say Hello. Finally, Foreign Minister Hazan spoke for the first time. What happens if we do not sign your charter? Yila's throat tightened. Then the declaration of war remains in effect. The Senate will be forced to either follow through on its commitment or face internal collapse. Neither option leads to peace. So we sign under threat of invasion, Hassan said. That is your diplomatic solution. I am offering the best path I can see, Yila replied. The alternatives are worse. Secretary General Okonkwo stood and walked to the window. She stared down at Earth for a long moment before speaking. We will join your Senate, Ambassador. But we have conditions. Yila felt a small surge of relief. The Senate is prepared to offer generous terms. No, Okonkwo said, turning to face her. You misunderstand. We are not asking for generous terms. We are telling you what we require before we will sign anything. And your Senate will agree to these conditions. Because the alternative is a war that neither side wants. Her eyes held Yila's with an intensity that made the ambassador's petals tremble. Shall I tell you what we want? One standard year after the declaration of war that nearly destroyed the Galactic Senate, the Great Chamber on Nexus Prime gathered once again. But the room had changed in ways that went far beyond the physical modifications. A new section had been added at the exact center of the amphitheater. It was larger than any other delegations area, positioned where acoustics were perfect, and sightlines gave an unobstructed view of every other seat in the chamber. The human delegation filled it completely. 40 representatives surrounded by advisors and specialists who seemed to be constantly taking notes and whispering to each other. High Arbiter Vel Thax called the session to order. He moved more slowly these days. The stress of the past year had aged him visibly. His once bright scales had faded to a dull gray, and 2 of his 6 eyes now required mechanical assistance to function properly. We convene to review the implementation of the Human Integration Amendments, he announced. These amendments, agreed upon as conditions of human membership in the Galactic Senate, represent the most significant changes to our charter in 4,000 years. Ambassador Crixon shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had been among the loudest voices calling for war against humanity. Now he found himself serving on 3 committees overseen by human representatives. His every decision subject to review and potential reversal. The holographic display activated, showing a summary of the changes. Yila read through them, still marveling at how quickly the humans had reshaped an institution that had existed for millennia. First, there was the transparency mandate. All Senate records were now open to any member species upon request. No more hidden files. No more administrative queues where important matters could be lost and forgotten. If something was flagged for action, automated systems would track it until completion. Second, the voting reform. No declaration of war could proceed without a 90-day investigation and diplomatic engagement period. All evidence had to be shared with the species being accused. They had the right to respond, to present their case before any vote was held. Third, the Security Council. A new body with permanent representatives from each of the major galactic regions, plus rotating seats for smaller species. This council could veto any military action with a 2/3 majority. And humanity held one of those permanent seats. Fourth, the Contact Protocol. Any species discovered in the future would receive immediate communication attempts. No more waiting until they developed specific technologies. No more administrative delays. First contact would happen as soon as possible, conducted by trained diplomats following strict guidelines. Fifth, the accountability framework. The 312 species who had voted for war were required to contribute to a fund supporting diplomatic initiatives throughout the galaxy. A reminder, the human said, that decisions had consequences. Senator Tormak watched the proceedings from the archives section. His department had been completely restructured. New systems tracked every piece of information that entered their records. Nothing would be forgotten again. He should have resented the changes, but honestly, he felt relieved. The old system had been a disaster waiting to happen. It had just taken humans to expose how badly broken it was. The session continued with routine business. Trade agreements were discussed. Border disputes were mediated. A new species from the far edge of the galaxy was welcomed as the 349th member of the Senate. Throughout it all, the human delegation participated actively. They asked questions. They proposed amendments. They challenged assumptions that other species had accepted without thought for thousands of years. It was exhausting and uncomfortable, and exactly what the Senate needed. During a break in the proceedings, Ambassador Yila found herself standing near Secretary General Okonkwo. The human leader was studying a display showing trade routes throughout the galaxy, her expression thoughtful. "Your people have adapted quickly," Yila observed. "Most new member species take decades to fully participate in Senate activities." Okonkwo smiled slightly. "We had strong motivation. When you discover that an organization almost destroyed your civilization through carelessness, you make sure it cannot happen again. Are you satisfied with the changes?" Satisfied is too strong a word. Let us say I am hopeful. The amendments are a good start. But laws only matter if people follow them. The real test will come when the next crisis arrives, and someone has to choose between following the rules and taking the easy path. Yila considered this. "You do not trust us, should I?" Okonkwo asked. "Your Senate knew about humanity for 2 centuries and never bothered to say hello. When you finally noticed us, your first response was to declare war. Trust is earned, Ambassador. We have not seen much evidence that your Senate deserves it. Then why join at all? You could have refused. Your military was strong enough to make invasion extremely costly. You could have remained independent." Okonkwo turned to face her fully. "Because independence means isolation. We spent 200 years alone in the universe. We built our civilization in the dark, never knowing if we would encounter friends or enemies among the stars. Now we know. There are 348 other species out there. Some will be enemies. Some might become friends. But we will never find out by hiding behind our borders." She looked back at the display, at the vast network of connections spanning the galaxy. "We joined because it was the right thing to do. Not for your Senate, not for the safety it might provide, but because intelligent beings should talk to each other. They should share knowledge and art and history. They should build something greater than any one species can build alone. That is why we are here, even after everything that happened. Especially after everything that happened. Your Senate made terrible mistakes. But so have we. Humanity's history is full of wars and cruelty and stupidity. We do not judge you for being imperfect. We judge you by whether you learn from your failures and try to do better." The break ended, and representatives returned to their seats. Yila watched the human delegation take their positions at the center of the chamber. They moved with confidence, as if they had always belonged there. In a way, perhaps they had. The invitation might have been delayed by 2 centuries, but in the end, it had still arrived. High Arbiter Velthax called for attention. Final item of business. The Committee on Historical Review has completed its investigation into the Committee on Historical Review has completed its investigation into the Committee on Historical administrative failures that led to delayed contact with humanity. Their report includes recommendations for preventing similar incidents in the future. The report appeared on the holographic display. 2,000 pages documenting every mistake, every oversight, every missed opportunity. It was a harsh and unflinching examination of how institutions could fail, even when individual members had good intentions. Senator Tormak rose to present the findings. His voice was steady as he outlined the failures and the proposed solutions. When he finished, the chamber was silent. Then Secretary General Okonkwo stood. On behalf of humanity, I accept this report. We acknowledge the Senate's effort to understand what went wrong and to ensure it never happens again. We look forward to a future where all intelligent species are welcomed as equals, regardless of when they develop spaceflight or where they are located in the galaxy. She paused, and her next words seemed to be directed at every being in the chamber. We are all travelers on the same journey. The universe is vast and ancient and full of wonders we have not yet imagined. It would be a shame to face that immensity alone when we could face it together. The session closed shortly after. Representatives scattered to their ships and their homeworlds, carrying news of the day's proceedings to billions of waiting citizens. Yila remained behind, watching the human delegation file out of the chamber. Secretary General Okonkwo caught her eye and nodded, a small gesture of acknowledgement between diplomats who had faced a crisis together and survived. The Galactic Senate would never be the same. Humans had arrived, and they had brought their strange mix of aggression and idealism, suspicion and hope. They had forced changes that many species had resisted for millennia. They had proven that even the oldest institutions could learn new things, and somewhere in the archives, properly filed and tracked this time, there was now a complete record of first contact with humanity, a reminder of what could go wrong when civilizations forgot to communicate, and what could go right when they finally decided to try. The universe continued its endless expansion, stars being born and dying across billions of light years. But in one small corner of one ordinary galaxy, something remarkable had happened. 349 species had agreed to work together to build something larger than any of them could build alone. It was not a perfect arrangement. It would never be perfect. But it was a start, and for the first time in a very long while, Ambassador Yila felt genuinely hopeful about the future.